Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where every day we continue to explore the impact of technology in solving real-world problems and bringing value to businesses. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we're going to have an invigorating conversation in store for you because I'm joined by my new friend, JJ, the founder of OnLoop, which is a groundbreaking company redefining the very essence of performance management and team development. And he's no stranger to the challenges of the corporate world, having held significant roles in global giants from Uber to Accenture. But it was his frustration with existing tools for performance management that led him to go out on his own and embark on a brave entrepreneurial journey. And he founded OnLoop back in 2020 to pioneer a new category called collaborative team development. And this venture aims to revolutionise how hybrid teams are assessed and developed, which is a subject of increasing importance in the modern workplace, isn't it? So I'm hoping we can explore how to manage team capacity and productivity effectively in a hybrid working environment, driving shared clarity and visibility on business and personal goals, the importance of that, the art of feedback, building habits for sharing frequent and constructive feedback, and why traditional performance stories might just be a waste of. I think most of us will agree on that, but maybe AI can improve a few things. So we'll talk about all that, the role of technology, the pitfalls of current performance management systems, and as I said, explore those disruptive technologies that are changing the game. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Singapore, where today's guest is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Projjal. I also go by JJ, if that's easier for people. And I'm a tech entrepreneur who lives in Singapore.
You've got a great startup story. I mean, OnLoop was born out of your own frustration with existing performance management tools and processes. And while many, including myself, may complain about some of those moments, you went out and did something about it. So can you elaborate on what exactly triggered this frustration during your time at companies in everything from Uber to Accenture?
No, thank you. I think one of the founding moments was back in 2018 when I was sent up to the Philippines to run Uber's Philippines business. And 2 weeks on taking on that GM role, we had to then calibrate the whole team. And in those 2 weeks, all that people did was sit and write reviews, and work kind of stopped. And then when I walked into the calibration room, we still made decisions based on what people remembered, and sort of who was the most visible, either from a manager perspective or IC perspective. And so, I feel like it kind of stayed on with me since that moment that, you study management topics, you study leadership, you study entrepreneurship, and people talk about how important people are. And all they say is hiring and retaining people is the most important thing that you can do as a leader. But the tools that I was exposed to were the opposite of that. And it felt like a pretty compelling and important gap to fill in terms of ensuring that we give managers the right tools and approaches to truly bring out the best in their teams. And that wasn't my experience.
And you also introduced a new category called collaborative team development. So what is CTD and what is it that sets it apart from traditional performance management models? Can you just break down its core principles there?
Sure. So, when we look to rethink sort of performance and productivity from scratch, in our conversations with various Stanford professors, with various customers, books that we read, it became very clear that to drive consistent high performance, you're essentially trying to manage a few different layers for each individual.
Yeah.
And CTD essentially became a culmination of this 5-layer hierarchical framework to drive everyday performance. And typically managers in a pre-pandemic world could could often go through the 5 layers, and the 5 layers are not rocket science. It's one, each person's well-being; 2, specifically what goals they're working on and how they're progressing; 3, ensuring that they receive enough celebratory feedback so they understand what their strengths are; 4, ensuring they're receiving enough constructive or improved feedback to identify where their blind spots might be or where improvement areas might be; and 5 is ongoing skills development based on each person's sort of goals as well as feedback. And there's a very clear hierarchy to those 5 levels, whereby the well-being and the goals are towards the foundation and bottom of it. And in fact, when you look into any company that's not doing very well, it's often because there isn't clarity on what people are working on and how this is progressing at a micro level. And companies that are very aligned and are high-performing typically are better at distilling down into the very depths of the organization and what's going on. And then recognition, constructive feedback, and ongoing learning really become about how you retain high performers and build a very high-performing organization. And so for us, we didn't necessarily feel like we came up with something that was new from a concept perspective, but as we started speaking to customers about how to implement the framework, a light bulb really lit up for a lot of folks around, wow, that just makes management so much easier and so much more approachable. Whereas when a manager has 6 to 8 direct reports, it's very overwhelming to think about where you unblock each team member and how that changes every week.
And something you've emphasized here is how difficult it has been for managers to gauge teams' productivity in real time. So how at OnLoop do you offer solutions to address this very challenge? And can you maybe expand on why it's so crucial for team success right now too?
So actually, I was diagnosed with clinical anxiety last year. And it took a really big hit on my overall productivity. And I started working with an executive coach, and I started working with a therapist. And what they really insisted on was, despite the fact that I was running a mile a minute as a CEO, until I fixed that basal productive capacity, working on anything else was unproductive. And as a manager, and really as a coach to your team, what is important to know is what's happening for every team member and make sure you meet them where they are. And this doesn't have to be complicated. In our app, it's a very simple color scale from blue to red on how productive do you feel or where's your productive capacity at the moment. And we're all humans. We're not robots. We're not the same every day. And when someone's in a place where they're not very productive, a manager's job is often to understand why and help them process and bring them back up to a better productive place. And when they are in a better productive place, that's when really sort of honing in on each person's goals and giving them clarity becomes more important. And so what we've done through the product is try to build these micro habits that allow managers to truly understand what's going on for each individual, to then know where to intervene and how to unblock every team member.
And you mentioned a great word there, clarity. And you often stress the importance of shared clarity and visibility on both businesses and their personal goals. So can you expand on how OnLoop better facilitates that? And also maybe expand on what are the broader implications on things like team cohesion and individual job satisfaction, because that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
Yeah, so through the pandemic, we saw a lot of issues with burnout, and people quiet quitting and checking out. And there's a big myth that burnout is related to how hard someone is working. And in fact, burnout tends to correlate much more with, are people feeling a sense of progress? And people feel a sense of progress when they're clear on when they're going. And that clarity, and actually what we do with the CTD framework is our app gives every person an indicative clarity score, and then gives each individual and each manager next actions to take to increase their clarity. And in some cases, someone's clarity might be enhanced because they need improved feedback because they haven't got constructive feedback and they've been crushing all their goals and unsensible powers. In some cases, they might be because they have too many high priority goals and they're working on 6 P0s at once, which is just not feasible. or in some cases might be because they want to learn a new skill that's critical and require the time to learn it. And there's an optimal level across the 5 pyramids, very similar to how fitness products work, and the Oura Ring or the Whoop Band that gives you a readiness score based on diet, sleep, exercise. And so we've taken that same model to, team health or team fitness, to help people sort of intervene where needed, and also ensure that goals in the organization really cascade down, and it's clear to every person as to why they're working on what they're working on, and how that impacts the broader organization. Because often when people feel like they belong to something greater than them, and that the work that they're doing is contributing to something greater, that's a huge motivator for sort of, putting in the extra mile, feeling engaged, operating as a unit and as a team. And so teams that crush their goals together stay together, right? And therefore sort of providing a sense that we're all in this together is very, very important, especially in this new age of hybrid work when people are not in the office all the time.
And before you came on the podcast, I was also reading about your viewpoint on things like AI and performance summaries. And you mentioned that the traditional written performance summaries might be a waste of time now in this digital age. So can you expand on that and how generative AI might step in to make this process more efficient, and what the initial feedback from users have been as a result of this as well?
Yeah, so one thing I often say that humans are good at making observations. They are not good at stitching together things coherently from memory. And so the reason why performance reviews are so biased and unfair and people complain about it is because every 6 or 12 months, someone's trying to sit down and write what happened the last 6 months. And that's just not humanly possible. And in those cases, 2 types of observations come up. One, the ones that happened most recently, and B, the one that created the most impact, be it positively or negatively. And as a result, you end up with a very flawed process. Further, whether someone gets a good review is based on how eloquent someone's manager might be, or how self-promoting you are in writing reviews, which is the opposite of what it should be. We should have people focused on doing the good work and then assessing them fairly, not assessing them based on someone's sort of eloquence prowess. And what large language models and generative AI can do is create a common level of rhetoric and language around each person's achievements, and be able to sort of summarize all of that in a tone that is consistent across the whole organization, so that when we are discussing someone's development or performance, or we're deciding what ratings or bonuses they get, we sort of read off a same script, and not a script based on whether someone's American versus European versus Asian, and what level of English prowess they have, and how hard they push for their people. And so we truly believe that having the right conversations around each person's development every 3 or 6 months is hypercritical, but those conversations should happen through AI-enhanced summaries that our product puts together based on 360 observations that might come from the manager or peers that get collected over time.
And we will have business leaders listening all over the world that are trying to get to grips with managing hybrid teams. It's a big talking point right now. And given the rise of remote work and indeed your own globally distributed team, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the benefits and the challenges of managing hybrid teams, and how at OnLoop do you address some of these unique dynamics too?
It's a great question. I mean, ultimately, our job is to solve for managing hybrid teams. So if we don't drink our own Kool-Aid, we can't really solve it. And so we do have a team that's across 6 different countries, 4 different time zones. And I do a 9 p.m. to midnight shift Monday to Thursdays because that's the only way I can manage a global organization. I think what distributed teams give people is the flexibility to hire cost-effective talent anywhere in the world. And frankly, if you're building a company out of New York or San Francisco and the only place you can hire are those places, it is incredibly difficult for younger companies to sort of scale unless you are raising a ton of venture capital, and obviously that environment has also changed in the last year or two. And so I think once distributed work became the norm, you can hire talent anywhere, and that really increases the optionality that companies have, especially younger companies. And then B, I think for a lot of folks with families, it really helps to not think about the workday as this fixed time block of 8 hours here, 8 hours there. So I truly believe that the notion of the 8-hour workday came from factories and is no longer relevant. In fact, most people are not productive for 8 hours at one go. And so there's no reason why you can't work in 5 2-hour chunks as long as you have the right synchronous level of work needed to talk to your colleagues, etc. And then you can work anywhere, anytime. And so those flexibility benefits also mean that I think people are generally happier. In large cities, there's often a commute. If you live in Manila or Jakarta or Mumbai, it might take you 2.5 hours to get to work. So you're commuting for almost a work day in addition to work. So there's a lot of benefits to sort of remote, hybrid, flexible work. I think the downsides, and I see this consistently when I talk to companies, is that they just feel that there is lesser accountability. And back to our favorite word, there's just reduced clarity in what's going on. And that's why a lot of CEOs, ideally want to have the people back in the office, because in the absence of good tools and the absence of good approaches, in-office work does work better. And that is unequivocally true. It just means that you can't hire certain people, and it's not feasible for some folks. But if you take a team of 10 people and they have zero cost to coming into work, and are in the same room all the time, you're going to have shared collaboration and sort of creativity at a level that's higher than teams being distributed. But I think the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't think we're going back to the 5-day in-person office anymore, and which is why we feel as motivated as we do to slog our asses off to make sure that we can actually make hybrid work for managers around the world.
Completely agree with you on that. And going back to a few moments ago when we were talking about feedback culture, I'm conscious for many business leaders listening today, constructive feedback, it's often easier said than done when talking to team members. So I'm curious, what tools or frameworks do you offer at OnLoop, especially to make that process of giving and receiving feedback less cumbersome, less awkward, and more meaningful?
Yeah, so with our customers, we actually do a feedback masterclass as part of our onboarding program. And we really walk people through sort of the various myths around feedback and the various types of feedback. And really what comes in the way of good feedback is emotion. And that emotion can be anger if you're someone senior and you're frustrated with someone, or it can be a sense of awkwardness to give a colleague feedback. You don't know how that'll get received. You don't know if it's your place or not. And often because people get caught in the emotion, they don't end up delivering the feedback. And in fact, at one of our customers, after they started using OnLoop for a year, it's a company called Socialize in Dubai, people started rethinking feedback as guidance more than criticism. Because if it's a blind spot and nobody told you, you'll actually never get better. And the only way you get better is if someone tells you about it. And so we taught people the situation, behavior, impact framework. So are the most widely used frameworks around how to give feedback more effectively. But now with generative AI, we can actually just record people's raw observations and rewrite that feedback in the situation, behavior, impact model. And so in our app that's getting released in a couple of weeks, people will have a voice recorder that they can just jot an observation, which is, Michael's late all the time, or Michael tends to quieten up when he gets tough feedback. And we will then rewrite that in a way that is encouraging and direct, and also sort of figure out what behaviors or competencies are demonstrated or not demonstrated by the person, so that we can get much more tactical about the substance of the feedback versus being caught in the emotion.
And again, when I was researching you before you came on the podcast today, I was reading how you hail from India, studied in Singapore and the United States, and have a team spread across different continents. And I think you've got an incredible, unique global perspective here. And I'm curious, how has that perspective influenced what you do at OnLoop, your approach, especially to things like team development and performance management? Because you've seen and experienced so much across the spectrum here. So how has that helped you?
Yeah, no, where it really helps is making sure that when we build products and we dog food it ourselves, we can be certain that there's no bias or there is minimal bias, because we have a global team of different genders, different sexual orientations, different races, different ages. And so when we get feedback on our product internally, it is quite a wide swath of people that are providing feedback on it. And so you can build products that are very relevant globally from day zero, and you don't have to adjust when you're expanding across geographies, and which is why even today, as a very young company, we have customers all around the world. And we see similar behaviors, and the product works in Japan as well as in the US, as well as in Dubai, as well as in Australia, as well as Singapore. And so I think that non-American companies end up being default global often because they don't have a primary market that's huge, and especially in software. And so versus US companies will be US focused for a very long time, even before they think about international. And that has certain benefits too. But I think it allows us to aspire to build a very large global business. And we set the foundations right away so that once you put that in place, it's easier to sort of have that global ethos. But if you grow quite a bit without it, it's quite hard to then change the culture later on.
And there's also a real pressure on everybody listening, including ourselves here, on being in a state of almost continuous learning. So I've got to ask, as someone that's right in the eye of the storm, so to speak, where or how do you self-educate? Is there anything you can share around that might help everyone listening?
Yeah, podcasts. And which is why I love the medium as much as I do. And, being a software founder out in Singapore, building for the US and the rest of the world, I don't think I would have got this far had I not had amazing content to learn from and amazing founders and speakers to listen to stories and learn directly from. And so I am incredibly grateful for podcasts as a knowledge medium, especially conversational podcasts, because it lets you feel like you're part of the conversation, and then it connects dots in different ways. And B, I also have a coach, and I think every CEO should have a coach, and I also coach a few CEOs myself. And so I think having people around you who might be a couple of steps ahead or play the same sport in a different way is incredibly helpful to be a sense of support.
Love that. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. And for anyone listening that maybe want to find out more information, explore any of the topics we discussed today, find out more information about you, connect with your team, ask questions, or just find out more information about OnLoop, where would you like to point everyone listening?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best. And so you can find me, JJ Ghatak, or OnLoop on LinkedIn. And our website, onloop.com, is a constant work in progress, but hopefully it should shed a little bit more light also on what we do.
Well, as we've covered today in our conversation, clunky performance management approaches have turned goals, feedback, and learning into almost everyday chores to a certain degree. And writing performance summaries is also arguably a waste of time. But I love what you're doing here, how you're using technology to build better habits for sharing frequent and constructive feedback, empowering teams to reach their fullest potential. And I just cannot thank you enough for sharing your story today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
So a huge thank you to today's guest. I think we covered some invaluable insights today on managing hybrid systems, fostering a feedback-centric culture, and leveraging technology for performance management. And I think a big takeaway from our discussion for me is that clunky, old methods are not just ineffective, but make meaningful goals, feedback and learning feel like chores. So yes, maybe it's time to rethink and reinvent our approaches to extract the fullest potential from our teams. And if you've got anything you'd like to share, remember, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn as well, just at Neil C. Hughes. Send me a message. Let me know if you've got anything you would like to ask me or a comment about today's episode. Whatever it is, keep those messages and questions coming over, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.